Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. We'll go ahead and get started. I pray everyone's doing well. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Thank you so much for taking time out on a Tuesday afternoon or evening to be with us, inshallah. And today we're covering a topic that's quite important, both for people who will be traveling on Hajj with their family or those who actually will not be traveling with their family but are caregivers and primary caregivers. And so before we even, get into it, I do want to first take just a moment to appreciate all it that you do as a caregiver. I know it's not a, a role that, you take lightly or one that's walk in the park. Of course, it's a really big responsibility and a really big amana from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you have a family member who you're caring for, whether it's your spouse or your parent or your child, whoever that person might be. And so, of course, the day to day is obviously a challenge in and of itself. But when you're going on any sort of trip, you're traveling halfway across the world, that's going to come with its complications. And then when you think about Hajj, with all of its, difficulties and hardships, will just kind of, you know, amount to even more of those complications kind of piling up and making it so that there's a lot to take into consideration, right? As both a caregiver or somebody who might need these services. So, who is this webinar for? Inshallah, this webinar is for those folks who might be in need of the services we're going to talk about today, inshallah. It is also for those folks who care for a person who is in need of these supports that we're going to mention, inshallah. Whether or not you are traveling with your family, inshallah, this webinar, I hope, will be a source of information and a starting point for you to kind of begin your education of like what things will look like for your family member who you're taking care of when they're in the KSA, what you can reasonably expect, what sort of accommodations they might receive, and where they might face some sort of difficulties, and then how we can best prepare for that, inshallah. So I'll try to keep it, on the relatively shorter side, inshallah, but I do want to make sure that I'm comprehensive in going through some of these points. So just off the bat, again, thinking about what are those types of accommodations or what are those requests that people might need assistance with. The really big one that I think comes to mind for me, and one that I've definitely worked with people in previous Hajj years and already am working with some folks this year, is the limited mobility or difficulty walking. So whether this means that, the person is completely wheelchair bound, and doesn't walk at all, or perhaps it's their day-to-day life, they are able to walk, but because of the long distances in Hajj, they're not able to, or perhaps it's I have sometimes examples where the person has just gotten off of surgery and they're coming on Hajj, so normally they might not have limited mobility, but because of the fact that they're just off of surgery, whatever the case is, they have some sort of difficulty walking, and oftentimes that means that they need that extra assistance of having a wheelchair or having supports that help out with the walking. Right. Besides that, of course, there's some other ailments that come to mind, deafness, or if somebody is visually impaired or blind. Besides that, we see folks who have things like memory challenges or other cognitive challenges, some of those coming with age, others just coming from, cognitive decline, things like that. We also have had Hujjaj in the past, inshallah, we'll again this year have Hujjaj with special needs. And inshallah, we are there to care for them as well. There's others who have serious medical conditions. This is a really big one when you're going on Hajj. It's really great to make sure that those things are communicated from beforehand because, as you know, Hajj is very physically oriented. It's very exertive of the body. And so it, goes without saying that medical conditions can obviously be flared up and can be made worse in these scenarios, right? And then besides that, the common thing of like language barriers, if you have an elderly perhaps you're sending your parents or something like that, and English isn't their main language, or perhaps Arabic isn't their main language, right? You might be a little worried about sending them on their own, and we can talk a little bit about language barriers and things like that. But for the most part, these are the types of things that we, see requests for. There might be other needs, and requirements that people have. Always happy to listen to folks and to hear what people might need assistance with, and how we can best support them. But essentially, today's webinar, the whole point of this, exercise that we're doing, the whole point of having this support group is for folks who have family members who might need any of the additional assistance that I just mentioned during their Hajj trip. And so, whether or not you plan on being with your family member, I know some people weren't able to get the package, or perhaps because of one thing or another, are not actually traveling with the family member who they're normally a caretaker of. The purpose of today's webinar is just so that we can kind of pinpoint these specific needs that they might have before Hajj begins, right? We'd want to know, and we want to have this education. We want to make sure people are well informed well before, they get to the airport, and then they're on the ground and they're having, these needs come up and these issues come up, and we haven't pre-planned for them, right? But so if we know about these things from beforehand, we can accommodate them better, inshallah. So again, the point of this webinar is not going to be to freak anyone out, and I'm going to be very explicit when I lay out what you can expect, what things will look like. But at the same time, the point is not to scare anyone or to make you unnecessarily worried, right? It's really just to give you the information you need to empower you to make, a plan from beforehand and make decisions that need to be made from beforehand. And that'll make a little bit more sense as we get into it and we have more context, inshallah. So first of all, I think a good place for us to just really start from is what kind of supports are going to be provided, right? Whether you're somebody who's going on Hajj who needs these things, or you're going with a family member who has these requirements, or you're sending a family member who has these requirements, what can you reasonably expect that will be taken care of, right? Reasonable accommodations are absolutely, something that we would take into account and try to accommodate as best as possible. The reason I say reasonable accommodations, and this is somewhat of a disclaimer in that um, not everything which is normally accommodated here in the United States, and especially when it comes to things like disabilities, is going to translate over the same way in the KSA. Yes, we have, other ways that we're going to go about it, but it's not going to be a one-to-one match. It's not going to look the same, right? And so I'll talk a little bit more about what's outside of the scope and what doesn't come under reasonable accommodations, but the best way to know if an accommodation is reasonable or not is to just ask, right? Like, hey, we need XYZ. Are you guys able to facilitate, or do you have anything you can do in place of that? And we'd be happy to have that discussion and to work something out, right? Besides that, the WhatsApp group is great for communication because it's exactly that. It's communication, right? Like the first and foremost thing, like I mentioned, it's going to be having these conversations, it's going to be communicating the needs, communicating if something goes wrong, na'udhu billah, we, ask Allah's protection, communicating what things are going to look like, what the plan is going to be in place, right? Communicating whether or not this need, maybe, somebody from now thought they would need a wheelchair, but actually doesn't need it. Or maybe somebody was like, no, I have my son to push it, but for one reason or another, their son's not able to push it. Now they need to get someone to push it, right? So having communication, it's going to make the entire journey smoother. That's true whether or not someone needs accommodations, but it's, exponentially more important when there's these things at play. Besides that, medical assistance, right? What I will say here is, first aid, um, your basic sort of medical assistance, that's definitely, inshallah, you can count on it being there. Things like, somebody has a fever, caught a cold, um, maybe they have dehydration, heat exhaustion, or heat stroke, like really basic medical first aid type of stuff. Besides that, when you get into the more like higher category illnesses or higher category issues that someone might be having, perhaps, irregular a heart condition or whatnot, that will then be that, we would take them to the hospital and then they'd have that medical assistance, but in the form of a hospital, whereas, these smaller, more basic things get covered by our medical staff. So to be very, transparent there of how those things work. So if it's, something more serious, more grave, that's going straight to the hospital, inshallah. Besides that, offering wheelchairs and support in hiring someone to assist with the pushing of the wheelchair. So I do want to be extremely clear here. I don't want anyone to leave, the webinar not understanding the distinction I'm about to make. The wheelchairs, inshallah, are free for you. They're free for your family member. They're free for whoever needs them. If you need a wheelchair, please put in the request, inshallah, during the days of Hajj. So the 8th of Dhul Hijjah, the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, you'll have your wheelchair available to you, right? So put in the request. What does not come with that wheelchair, however, is someone who will push it, right? So in that case, you'd either have one of your family members, maybe your son, your husband, or a brother, whatever the case is, somebody pushing the wheelchair, or you can always optionally hire out someone to push the wheelchair, and that's pretty readily available, um, within the vicinities when Hajj is happening. So even like last year, I can speak to it that we like would go outside the tent, and there's folks there who are there, willing to push for a certain reasonable fee. And so what we can do is help kind of match you with someone and help just haggle it to a good, decent amount, obviously. One that's both fair to you and to the person who's doing the hard work of pushing you. So that's kind of where we can come in and help out. So the wheelchair itself, that would be covered. Having someone to push it, that's, something you'd have to either pre-plan for by having your family member, or, plan to hire out someone to do that. The question then remains, okay, what about my days in Medina? Where's my wheelchair? Things like that. You can request that actually at the hotel lobby as well. So the hotels will have wheelchairs that are available, and you can get that, even in your Makkah hotel, you can ask them, and they should be able to provide you with a wheelchair. Some people optionally also prefer to just buy their own wheelchair when they get there and then donate it as they're leaving, which is, like a nice kind act and a sadaqah for yourself as a form of charity, but definitely it's not a requirement. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. You should be able to get a free wheelchair the entire time you're there. If not from the hotel, you can also borrow it from the haram as well, and the haram does have wheelchairs that you can borrow from them. Um, and so, just those are some considerations to have if, wheelchair is one of the accommodations that you want to keep in mind. Another kind of reasonable support that we can provide is just considering special needs and factors when we plan movements. And so what I mean by this simply is if I know from beforehand that I have a brother on the bus, or a brother who's supposed to travel on the bus, who is not able to climb the stairs. Like, one thing is like not being able to, it's not comfortable, or they, not easily accessible. But the other thing is like if there's somebody who is, na'udhu we ask Allah to protect us, is paralyzed. And I've had this scenario before. I had a Haji in my group who was completely paralyzed from like the arms down, so he couldn't move his legs at all. So for him to get on a bus, and the buses are not like the buses that we have here in the States, where they are disability friendly, where they're wheelchair friendly, right? Where they can kind of come down and the ramp comes out. They don't have that. They actually have multiple steps and they're really steep. So in that case, whenever I was planning any sort of movement, I'd always have a separate accommodation for him that was wheelchair friendly, right? Or that was, where his son was able to actually bring him into the vehicle. But that was only because I had known about it from beforehand, so I was able to make that requirement. So definitely, if we know about something like that from beforehand, we're able to then plan for it, right? Um, but what I do also want to set is really, really realistic expectations of like what can be done and what cannot be done, what's inside the scope and what's outside the scope. So one of the examples that I can give here is that same brother, again, not able to walk at all, right? He was wheelchaired around everywhere, but when you get to the Mina camp, for example, within the tent of Mina, there is not enough space for you to be wheeling around a wheelchair where where people sleep, where the beds are, because the beds come pretty close to each other. There's not enough of an aisle for a wheelchair to go through. So at that point, his son was just, holding him up and taking him into the tents. Now, is that the best way to go about it? Could more better accommodations be done? These are all questions, that I think are more long term and they're outside the scope of what any one of us can, obviously provide or come to change. Obviously, these are really like bigger level um instru in infrastructure things that we have to think about. But what we kind of know is that like things in the KSA are not as disability friendly as they are in the States. We are extremely used to having elevators everywhere. If not an elevator, then there'll at least be a wheelchair ramp. Places are made to be wheelchair friendly. I think there's laws in place here that will make sure that places have to be wheelchair friendly. We go to our local masjid. It's a disability friendly. You go to your local, really anything, superstore, whatever. And there's accommodations, right? That's not going to be the case in the KSA. And so I really want people to know that and to be aware of that before we go, because essentially, if you don't understand that, it's going to become very difficult to go through the trip, right? So things like, yes, we have elevators in our hotel, for example, right? Like that's it's definitely there, but it's not as one thing I'll say is like it's Hajj time, so it's super crowded, right? And perhaps in the States, if somebody sees someone with a wheelchair, they'll let them go ahead of them. That's not the atmosphere, that's not the, culture in the KSA. So that's something to be aware of. And I know Sister Noor will definitely mention more of this in her upcoming webinar about navigating the KSA, but I do want to make sure that we go through it here as well. So, just as a side says, we inshallah will do our absolute best to make sure that whatever we can do to make your Hajj journey smooth, we're doing it, right? We want every single person who comes on Hajj with us to have a healthy Hajj, to have a safe Hajj, and to have a spiritually enriching Hajj, right? We want you to go home, yes, born and, new again with all your sins forgiven, and we want you to make it home to your family safe and sound, right? Like we don't consider our Hajj done until we've heard that every single one of our Hujjaj have made it home to their families. They're safe, they're healthy, everything is well, right? And so whatever we can do to accommodate that, inshallah, we will. However, there's going to be things throughout the journey that are just simply out of our control. Just could kind of give you another example. If anybody, has traveled with a family member who is completely wheelchair bound on, a flight recently or at any point, you'll know that a lot of the times they do not bring the wheelchairs all the way into the airplane because again, it's the aisle space doesn't allow for it. They ask the person to walk to the door of the airplane, and then once they get out onto the jet bridge, then they'll wheel them out. If it's somebody who completely can't walk, they have other accommodations, but they're not able to get that wheelchair in, right? So the same way, we're going to be facing different things throughout the journey that are going to make it a little bit harder because of the, accommodations that this person needs, but that too is part of the test, and inshallah, we'll find a way around it. But it just might not be the way you're used to seeing, right? So I think one of the things that I put for outside the scope of support here is personally pushing their wheelchair. Um, as much as I would love to earn those rewards, unfortunately, I won't be able to personally push your wheelchair because like all the other guides, have, not just one person, but a whole group of people who I'm going to be guiding or who they're going to be guiding, right? And so if they're pushing just one person, what happens to anyone else who needs someone to push them? And what happens to everyone else who's looking to be guided, right? And so we're one person who's there for everyone, right? And so it's not I think reasonable for anyone to expect that, okay, like my guide will be the one pushing me. Either you have a family member or a friend, or you can hire out someone who can push you throughout the Hajj or throughout your days there. That's totally fine. The next one is specific to folks who are, staying back and sending a family member on Hajj. Well, we're going to do the best to take care of your family member, keep you in the loop wherever we can. Providing real-time updates is just well beyond the scope of what can be possible, simply because I'm not necessarily going to be with that person every single minute of the day, right? And so if you call me and I pick up and I'm not with that person, you won't be able to get to speak to them. So the solution here is quite simple. It's just to make sure that whoever you're sending, your family member, maybe your mom, your dad, your uncle, your aunt, has a cell phone with them, so that way you can stay in contact with them as well, right? And so definitely feel free to reach out to us as guides. We're there, but is it going to be every single moment of the day? No, it won't. Like reasonably, like I said, it's one of us in a whole group of people. So we might be busy with another person, maybe someone's sick, maybe someone's, in the hospital, whatever the case might be. But because of that, we might not be able to get to your call, or we might not be able to connect you with your family member. So the best way of, staying in touch with them is for them to have their own cell phone, or to have, a friend who has a cell phone who they can rely on as well. And this is something that we touched on in yesterday's webinar for the sisters, of just like buddy system, right? Like always having a Hajj buddy with you who you can kind of lean on, if you're not feeling well, if they're not feeling well, if you need something, if they need something, if you sleep through the adhan, if they sleep through the adhan, really just having that person there with you, because as much as the guides are there to help out, there's only so many of us, right? And so you want to make sure that you have someone there for you all the time. And so that's where the buddy system really comes in. And I think the next one really goes hand in hand with that, which is like the being physically present for every moment of their journey. You're going to have times where a sister has a guide who is a male sheikh, right? And maybe you guys are already seeing assignments in Nusuk. Later on, you guys will, get to meet your shuyukh and your guides and things like that. If you're in a package where your sheikh is a male, in that case, of course, myself, Sister Khansa, Sister Noor will be there for you in the tents, and they'll be there to help you. But there's going to be times when, men and women are separated, so you're not going to be in direct contact with your own sheikh, right? And so if you're family back home, right, if you're a family member from back home and you've only ever heard of this one sheikh, you might not be able to get to talk to your mom or to your aunt because they're in two separate tents, and vice versa, right, with the female guides and the male, with the brothers. So just, mentally being prepared that the guide is there to make sure that they get through Hajj in a safe, smooth way, but they won't be there, 24/7 every second of every day with your family member only. They're going to be serving other people as well. So, if you want to keep constant connection, or you want to um, be there with them, right? Like those are kind of outside of the scope. So what we can do, so we find other ways around it, which is like having a buddy go with them, or making sure they have their cell phone and things like that. Absolutely. So the question of how can I get the support? If you haven't already done so, it says to fill out the Google form. I think everyone at this point has done it. This was a really long time ago, so I think the slide is a little outdated. But please do feel free to reach out to our help desk, whether it's on WhatsApp or a call or text. All of them, work. And if you're not already added into the group, you should already be added into the group. But if you're not already added into the group, they'll go ahead and do that, and they'll give you all of the numbers that you need to know. They're coming up in upcoming slides as well. I do think some of my slides got messed up here, so I was supposed to mention that we do have, subhanAllah, now a new system within the haram, so within the mataf, where you go for your tawaf, and for the mas'a, where you go for your sa'i, for folks who are, have difficulty walking. And this new system is one of golf carts. So the golf carts are great. I actually got to use them last year during Hajj. And the one thing I'll tell you is the wait time can be super long. I know that this year they're implementing, I think, a more of a structured approach with using a website. Last year it was just, a desk, and you would go and you'd wait in line and get your ticket, and then you'd wait for your time to come. But essentially those golf carts are really great. It's 50 riyals, which is about $14 for the tawaf, and another 50 riyals for your sa'i. So the entire umrah can be done in 100 riyals, about $30. And so it's great because that you just wait your turn to get onto the golf cart, and when you're on the golf cart, everything else is taken care of. They're driving you around, they're telling you when the black stone is there, they're telling you which du'as to read at certain points. They give you time to pray after your done with your tawaf, as well as they do the sa'i with you. And it really, really helps out for folks who have this any sort of issues. I have also heard that for those folks who are wheelchair bound, right? They're disabled. They actually, those golf carts are free. I do need to, make sure I get more better information on this of how you get the free golf carts because I've only ever paid to use one. But so what I can assume is going to happen is if there's a family member who's going with you who, isn't wheelchair bound, then they would pay you their share and then you would be okay to go on for free. Inshallah, as I get more updated information about that, happy to update folks on that information, but just, a little bit of background for you there. So that's one option. The other option, of course, is to just pay someone to push your wheelchair, and that's also totally valid and totally fine. That will be happening on not the main ground floor, but it'll be happening. The pushing of the wheelchairs happens on the first floor, and then there's a special third floor which is only for the golf carts. It's kind of like the roof area. And it's great, alhamdulillah. It works really well and it's very quick as like once you're on the golf cart, the tawaf and the sa'i goes very quickly. The wait can be quite long. Um, I think up to like 2 hours if I'm not mistaken, and then in Hajj times it can be even longer. So that's really for the, haram in Mecca. For the haram in Medina, it's pretty wheelchair friendly. There's ramps throughout the masjid. The only thing you really need, and even when you go to pray in the masjid, there's specific designated areas for wheelchairs. So it's really wheelchair friendly. The only thing you need to, I guess, keep in mind is just for when you go to visit the Rawda, the resting place of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you stand in line, there's a separate line for those who are in a wheelchair and a separate line for those who are not in a wheelchair. Of course, the person who's in a wheelchair is able to have one family member with them who can push them, family member, friend, or whoever else to push them. But besides that, then people would be separated based on if they're in a wheelchair or not in a wheelchair. So those are, I think, the main considerations to have. And really, like the main takeaway I want folks to just keep in mind, inshallah, and I know we're coming up towards the end of the webinar, but is just that things will look extremely different in the KSA than they are here in the United States. It's not a cause for, you to, I don't want anyone to worry or to, be freaked out or frazzled by this, but to just be mentally prepared that yes, things do look different. The availability of Braille, for those who are vision impaired or blind might be different. It's not going to be as widespread. The availability of other resources for people who are blind, deaf, might have cognitive disabilities, things like that. It's going to be less than here in the States, and it's also going to look different than here in the States, right? And so yes, they have ramps, for example. Sometimes the ramps aren't as nicely built, or you'll have to walk really from a different way to kind of make it onto the ramp. So just things to keep in mind from beforehand. Yeah. And so here we just have some important contact information. This is information that all will be provided, inshallah, both in the groups and also these webinar decks are available on our website. So if you want, you can take a picture of the screen or just visit the website and it'll be there as well. So this is when you are in the KSA during your trip. If you need to contact Noor Al-Fajr, these are your number that you can dial. Sorry, this is the number that you can dial, inshallah, and you'll get connected to somebody from us. Then we also have the main help desk number. This is available to you from now, till Hajj and throughout Hajj. So always feel free to call this number. If you have any additional questions that we don't get to go through during webinars and things like that, feel free to give us a ring or to give us a text, inshallah, and we can answer them. Besides that, I've also left some extra information here. This is like, the embassy and things like that. Inshallah, you won't need them, but it's nice to have the information there for emergencies. I know that there's folks in this webinar who will not be traveling with their family members, so good for you guys to have this. This has been covered in the previous webinars as well, but I just want to make sure that I put it on the screen and people can know this information. And lastly, just regarding, any sort of emergencies that might happen, we have the emergency number for health affairs, the emergency number for lost pilgrims, and emergency services. Allah forbid there's an emergency. Again, guides, like myself and volunteers are all around to help. So normally you're never really having to take these things into your own hand, but we want to equip you just in case if Allah forbid there's a medical emergency or, an accident or something like that. It's as simple as dialing 911 to get the help that you need. May Allah keep everyone safe, and I hope that no one has to dial these numbers, and these things don't come up. But just it's always better to know than to not know. And so inshallah, I'll leave that on the screen, and then it'll be put up onto the website as well, so that folks can actually benefit from this information, take it down, note it down. If you have a family member who's going, who's maybe a little bit older and isn't as, tech savvy, maybe just write it down for them as well so they have it. And with that, inshallah, I'll go ahead and open up for questions.